Hi, I'm Jenna, and yes, my own sister actually stood up at our father's will reading just to mock me in front of the entire family. She called me the charity case and laughed like it was some inside joke everyone understood, like I was nothing but a footnote in our family's story. But what she never expected was that our father had secretly changed everything in his final weeks. Stay with me, because what happened next didn't just quiet a room full of judgmental relatives. It shattered a dynasty built on nothing but deception. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 3 hours, that's all the notice I got before everything changed. A cream-colored envelope appeared in my mailbox with an embossed return address from Peterson Associates, the family law firm, just 3 hours before the scheduled reading of my father's will. No phone call, no courtesy heads up, just this formal envelope sitting innocently between bills and junk mail like it wasn't about to upend my entire world. Melissa had promised to keep me updated. That was a week ago at the funeral. A funeral. She orchestrated down to the imported flowers and the catered reception that felt more like a networking event than a goodbye. I'd barely managed to spend 5 minutes alone with Dad's casket to say a proper farewell. Now this. I stood in my tiny kitchen, turning the envelope over in my hands, not quite ready to open it. The late afternoon sun filtered through my apartment windows, casting long shadows across the countertop. My roommate's cat watched me with curious eyes from atop the refrigerator, probably wondering why I was just standing there, frozen. Typical Melissa move, I muttered to myself, finally sliding my finger under the seal. Always making sure I'm the last to know anything. Inside was a formal notice about the reading of Howard Blackwell's last will and testament, scheduled for 5 p.m. that very day at the family estate in Oak Ridge Hills. The paper was thick and expensive, the kind of stationery that costs more than my weekly grocery budget. At the bottom, a handwritten note in Melissa's perfect penmanship: "Try to dress appropriately for once." I placed the invitation on the counter and reached for the small wooden box I kept on my bookshelf. Inside was the only thing Dad had ever given me that Melissa didn't know about: a vintage pocket watch with our shared initials engraved on the back. HB for Howard Blackwell, JB for Jenna Blackwell. He'd slipped it to me during our last private conversation, his voice barely above a whisper. "Keep this close, Jenna. When the time comes, you'll understand why." I hadn't understood then. Now, staring at this last-minute invitation, I was beginning to. I checked the time, 2:15 p.m. The estate was an hour's drive from my apartment in the city, which meant I had less than 2 hours to prepare. Not enough time to process, certainly not enough time to strategize, but just enough time to shower, find something appropriate to wear, and make the drive without breaking too many traffic laws. Oak Ridge Hills still looked like something from a lifestyle magazine, all manicured hedges and perfect symmetry. The iron gate swung open as my 15-year-old Honda Civic approached, the security guard barely glancing at me before pressing the button. He'd probably been told to expect the other daughter, the one who didn't quite fit the Blackwell image. The driveway seemed longer than I remembered, curving through immaculate gardens before opening to the circular courtyard in front of the main house. I parked next to a row of luxury vehicles that made my car look like it had wandered into the wrong neighborhood. Taking a deep breath, I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. My dark hair was pulled back in a simple bun, my face bare except for a touch of mascara and lip gloss. The black dress I'd worn to the funeral was the only appropriate thing I owned, so it would have to do again. The massive front door opened before I could knock, revealing Carla, the housekeeper who'd worked for my father since before I was born. Her face softened when she saw me. "Miss Jenna," she said quietly, stepping aside to let me in. "It's good to see you." "You too, Carla," I replied, grateful for the one friendly face in this house. "How have you been holding up?" "Managing," she said with a sad smile. Your father is greatly missed." I nodded, unable to trust my voice. The foyer smelled of lemon polish and fresh flowers, everything pristine and perfect, just as Dad had always insisted. The familiar scent hit me with unexpected force, bringing memories flooding back, happy ones from early childhood, before Mom died, and darker ones from my teenage years, when Melissa began establishing herself as the favored. Daughter and I became increasingly invisible. "They're all in the main parlor," Carla said, gesturing toward the east wing. "Mr. Peterson arrived early to set up." "Thank you," I whispered, squaring my shoulders before heading in that direction. I could hear them before I saw them, the polite murmur of appropriate conversation, punctuated by the occasional laugh that was never too loud, never too genuine. The Blackwell way. As I entered the parlor, the conversation didn't exactly stop, but it shifted, like music changing key. My half-sister Melissa stood in the center of the room, resplendent in a tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than 3 months of my rent. At 35, 7 years my senior, she looked every inch the successful corporate attorney and heir apparent to the Blackwell fortune. Her blonde hair was styled in a sleek bob, her makeup flawless, her posture perfect. She turned when I entered, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Jenna," she said, voice carrying just enough to ensure everyone heard. "How nice of you to join us. We weren't sure you'd make it on such short notice." The emphasis on short notice wasn't lost on anyone. It was her way of saying I should be grateful to be included at all. "I received the invitation just a few hours ago," I replied evenly, refusing to take the bait. Thankfully, I was able to rearrange my schedule. I scanned the room, taking inventory of who was present. Uncle Richard, Dad's younger brother, nodded to me from his seat by the fireplace. Aunt Patricia, Dad's sister, gave me a tight smile that conveyed nothing. 2 cousins I barely knew, a business partner whose name I couldn't recall, and Mr. Peterson, the family attorney, who was arranging papers on the antique desk that had once been my father's favorite spot to work. "Well, we're all here now," Melissa said brightly, checking her watch. "Mr. Peterson, shall we begin?" The attorney nodded, his expression unreadable. "Please, everyone take a seat." I chose a chair slightly apart from the others, near the window that overlooked the rose garden Dad had loved so much. Outside, the gardener was trimming hedges as if it were any other day, as if the man who had created this estate wasn't gone forever. "Before we begin," Mr. Peterson said, adjusting his glasses, "I want to thank you all for coming on such short notice. As Howard's longtime legal counsel and friend, I can assure you that everything we discuss today reflects his explicit wishes." Melissa smiled confidently, crossing one designer-clad leg over the other. She'd been Dad's right hand for years, working alongside him at Blackwell Industries, positioning herself as the natural successor to his legacy. She caught my eye and raised an eyebrow slightly, a gesture I'd come to recognize as her way of saying, "Watch and learn, little sister." Mr. Peterson cleared his throat. "The last will and testament of Howard James Blackwell, being of sound mind and body, hereby declares the following distributions of his estate upon his death." He began with the smaller bequests, charitable donations, gifts to longtime employees, a substantial sum to Carla that made me smile inwardly. Dad had always appreciated loyalty. Then came the family distributions. Uncle Richard received Dad's collection of rare books. Aunt Patricia, the vacation home in Aspen she'd always admired. The cousins, various mementos and modest trust funds. Melissa's smile grew with each reading, her posture becoming more relaxed, more assured. This was proceeding exactly as she expected. I sat still, hands folded in my lap, trying to ignore the knot forming in my stomach. I wasn't here for money. I'd made peace with my position in the family hierarchy long ago. I was here to say goodbye, to the complex, distant man who had been my father, even if I'd never quite been the daughter he wanted. "And now?" Mr. Peterson said, looking up from his papers. "To the matter of Blackwell Industries and the primary estate." Melissa straightened, smoothing an invisible wrinkle from her immaculate suit. This was the moment she'd been waiting for. I saw her glance around the room, making sure everyone was paying attention to her triumph. "Regarding Blackwell Industries, all shares currently owned by Howard Blackwell." Mr. Peterson paused, adjusting his glasses again. Was it my imagination? Or did his eyes flick toward me for just a moment? "Are hereby bequeathed to Jenna Marie Blackwell, along with the position of Chief Executive Officer, effective immediately." The silence that followed was absolute. I couldn't have heard that correctly. There must be some mistake. Additionally, Mr. Peterson continued into the vacuum. "The Oak Ridge Hills estate and all its contents, excluding items specifically bequeathed above, are to be transferred to the sole ownership of Jenna Marie Blackwell." I felt the room tilt slightly. This couldn't be happening. Melissa had been groomed to take over the company since she was in college. She'd worked there for over a decade, climbing the ranks, learning every aspect of the business. I'd chosen a completely different path, becoming a high school art teacher, much to my father's disappointment. We'd barely spoken about the company in years. "This is absurd," Melissa's voice cut through the silence, sharp as a blade. "There's obviously been some terrible mistake." Mr. Peterson remained calm. "There is no mistake, Ms. Blackwell. I prepared this document myself, under Howard's direct instruction, just 3 weeks before his passing." 3 weeks? Melissa stood abruptly. "That's impossible. I was with him nearly every day during that time. He never mentioned revising his will." "He came to my office privately," Mr. Peterson said, his tone neutral but firm. "The document is properly executed, witnessed, and notarized." Melissa turned to me then, her perfect composure cracking to reveal something ugly underneath. "What did you do? How did you manipulate him when he was sick and vulnerable?" I sat frozen, as shocked as everyone else in the room. I had no idea. "Oh, please," she spat, her voice rising. "You've always played the victim, haven't you? Poor little Jenna, the artist, the sensitive one, the one who couldn't measure up to Dad's expectations. And now suddenly you're the heir to everything?" Uncle Richard cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Melissa, perhaps we should—" "No," she cut him off, eyes never leaving my face. "I want to know what kind of performance she put on to convince a dying man to throw away everything he built. What kind of lies did you tell him, Jenna?" The accusation hung in the air like poison. I felt my cheeks burn, not with guilt, but with a slow-building anger I'd suppressed for most of my life. "I didn't even know he was changing his will," I said quietly, finding my voice. "The last time I saw Dad was 3 weeks ago. We had lunch. It was civil, that's all." "Civil?" Melissa laughed, the sound brittle and sharp. "You expect us to believe you had one civil lunch and he decided to hand you the keys to his kingdom? After you abandoned the family business to finger paint with teenagers?" Before I could respond, Mr. Peterson intervened. "There is more." He reached into his briefcase and withdrew a sealed envelope. "Howard left this to be read at this time." He broke the seal and unfolded a letter written in my father's distinctive handwriting. The room fell silent again as he began to read. "To my family and friends gathered today. If this letter is being read, then decisions I made in my final weeks have come as a shock to most of you. I can particularly imagine my eldest daughter's reaction." A murmur rippled through the room. Mr. Peterson continued, "Melissa, you have been by my side at Blackwell Industries for many years. You are brilliant, determined, and formidable, qualities I've always admired. But in recent months, as I faced my mortality, I've had cause to reflect on what truly matters in this life. Melissa's face had gone completely still, a mask of composure that couldn't quite hide the storm behind her eyes. What I've realized, Mr. Peterson read, is that a company built on integrity must be led with integrity. 3 months ago, I discovered financial irregularities in our European division. Irregularities that trace directly back to decisions made under your authority, Melissa. A sharp intake of breath came from somewhere in the room. Melissa's face drained of color. Rather than confronting you immediately, I chose to observe. What I witnessed disturbed me deeply. Not just the ethical lapses in judgment, but your willingness to sacrifice others to protect yourself. When the discrepancies were noticed by our CFO, you arranged for him to be discredited and removed. When questions arose about contract manipulations, you diverted blame to lower-level employees who were subsequently terminated. "That's not what happened," Melissa interjected, her voice strained. "Dad knew about those decisions. He approved them." Mr. Peterson ignored her, continuing to read. "What troubles me most is not that you made mistakes, we all do, but that you refuse to acknowledge them, learn from them, or take responsibility for them. A leader who cannot own their failures becomes dangerous, not just to themselves, but to everyone who depends on them." I watched my sister's perfect facade crumble bit by bit as our father's words stripped away the narrative she'd constructed about herself. For the first time since we were children, I felt no satisfaction in her distress, only a profound sadness for what our family had become. "Jenna," the letter continued, and I felt every eye in the room turn to me, "has chosen a different path than the one I would have selected for her. For many years I viewed this as a failure, both hers and my own. I was wrong. Her strength has never been in following expectations, but in having the courage to be true to herself, even at great personal cost." Tears stung my eyes, blurring my vision. In death, my father was giving me the acknowledgement he'd never offered in life. 2 weeks before writing this, I visited Jenna's school unannounced. I watched her teach, observed how she connected with students others had given up on, saw the respect she commanded not through intimidation, but through genuine care. I realized then that she possesses exactly the qualities Blackwell Industries needs: integrity, compassion, and the wisdom to know that people are more important than profit margins. The pocket watch in my purse suddenly felt heavy. I remembered Dad's unexpected visit, how awkward and formal he'd seemed sitting in the back of my classroom. He'd said nothing about why he came, and I'd been too surprised to ask. We'd had coffee, afterward, making stilted small talk that never approached anything meaningful, or so I'd thought. "Jenna may not have the business experience Melissa does," Mr. Peterson read, "but she has something more valuable: the moral compass to guide Blackwell Industries into a future I can be proud of even if I'm not here to see it. She'll have advisors to help with the technical aspects of leadership, but the heart of the company, that must come from her." Melissa made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. "This is ridiculous. She knows nothing about running a company. Nothing." "The letter addresses that," Mr. Peterson said quietly before continuing to read. "I've arranged for a transition team of trusted executives who will support Jenna as she learns the business. They have instructions to be patient but honest, to guide but not control. The company will survive this change. It may even thrive. Because of it." He turned the page. "There is one final provision. Melissa will retain her current position as Chief Operating Officer, reporting directly to Jenna, for a probationary period of 1 year. During this time, she will have the opportunity to demonstrate that she has learned from her mistakes and is capable of the kind of leadership Blackwell Industries deserves. At the end of this period, Jenna will determine whether Melissa remains with the company." The air seemed to vibrate with tension. Melissa stared at me with naked hostility, all pretense of sisterly affection abandoned. "This is my final decision," Mr. Peterson concluded, "made with clear mind and heavy heart. I ask that you respect it, even if you cannot understand it. Howard Blackwell." He folded the letter and placed it carefully on the desk. No one spoke. Outside, the gardener continued his methodical trimming, oblivious to the earthquake that had just reshaped the landscape inside. Finally, Uncle Richard cleared his throat. "Well," he said inadequately, "Howard always did know how to make an exit." Aunt Patricia dabbed at her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. "I had no idea about any of this," she murmured. Melissa remained standing, her perfect posture now rigid with fury. She looked around the room as if searching for allies and found none. Finally, her gaze settled on me. "You won't last a week," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "You have no idea what you're getting into." I should have been intimidated. Instead, I felt a strange calm descend over me, as if Dad's words had unlocked something I'd kept buried for too long. "You're probably right," I said, rising to my feet. "I don't know the first thing about running a company, but I do know how to learn, how to listen, and how to treat people with respect. That seems like a decent place to start." Her laugh was sharp and dismissive. "Oh, Jenna, always the idealist. The business world will eat you alive." "Maybe," I conceded. "Or maybe it's time for the business world to change." I turned to Mr. Peterson. "I'd like to review the complete documentation at your earliest convenience, and I'll need to meet with this transition team my father mentioned." He nodded, something like approval flickering across his professional mask. "I've prepared a complete briefing. We can begin tomorrow morning if that suits you." "It does," I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. Melissa snatched her purse from the chair beside her. "This isn't over," she hissed, low enough that only I could hear. "Dad might have had a sentimental moment of weakness, but I've spent my entire life preparing for this. You think you can just walk in and take what's mine? You have no idea what's coming." She stormed out without another word, her heels clicking aggressively against the marble floor. The front door slammed hard enough to rattle the crystal chandelier overhead. The remaining family members exchanged uncomfortable glances before making their excuses and filing out, leaving me alone with Mr. Peterson and a future I'd never imagined for myself. "She's right about one thing," I said quietly once we were alone. "I have no idea what I'm doing." Mr. Peterson smiled for the first time that afternoon. "Your father anticipated that reaction. He left something else for you." He reached into his briefcase again and produced a small flash drive. "He recorded this 2 days before he passed. For your eyes only," he said. I took it, turning the small device over in my hand. "Thank you." "Miss Blackwell, Jenna," he corrected himself. "I worked with your father for over 30 years. He was a complicated man, not always easy to understand or to love. But in his final months, I saw a change in him, a kind of clarity. He believed in you, even if he never found the right words to tell you so." I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. "The car is waiting to take you to the company apartments downtown," he continued. "Your father thought you might prefer to stay there initially, rather than in this house with all its history. He thought of everything, didn't he?" I said, attempting a smile. "He tried to," Peterson replied. "Starting tomorrow, things will move very quickly. People will challenge you, test you, try to manipulate you. Some will see you as an easy mark, others as a threat. Your sister will almost certainly attempt to undermine you." "What should I do?" I asked, feeling suddenly overwhelmed. He considered for a moment. "Be yourself," he said finally. "That's what Howard wanted, not a copy of himself or of Melissa, but you, with all your unique strengths and perspectives." As I followed him out to the waiting car, I passed through the grand foyer where family portraits lined the walls. Howard Blackwell stared back at me from a dozen frames, his expression always serious, always commanding. The last portrait, taken just a year ago, showed him seated in his office chair with Melissa standing proudly behind him, her hand on his shoulder, both of them looking every inch the perfect corporate dynasty. There were no pictures of me anywhere. "We'll need to change that," I murmured to myself, fishing the pocket watch from my purse and holding it tightly in my palm. The initials pressed into my skin, HB, JB, a connection I'd never fully understood. Until now. As the car pulled away from the estate, I didn't look back. Whatever came next, I knew one thing for certain. Nothing would ever be the same again. Not for Blackwell Industries, not for Melissa, and especially not for me. The family mistake, the charity case, the disappointment who taught art to troubled teens. I was now the one holding the keys to the kingdom. And somehow, sitting in the back seat of that luxury car with my discount store dress and scuffed shoes, watching the gates of Oak Ridge Hills disappear in the rearview mirror, I wasn't afraid. For the first time in my life, I felt like Howard Blackwell's daughter. The company apartment wasn't what I expected. I'd imagined something sleek and cold, all chrome and leather and emptiness. Instead, I found myself standing in a space that felt almost welcoming. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city skyline, but the furniture was comfortable rather than imposing. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with a mix of business texts and classic literature. A small balcony held potted herbs and a bistro set perfect for morning coffee. "Your father renovated it last month," explained Diane, the executive assistant who'd met me in the lobby. She was in her 50s with salt and pepper hair cut in a practical bob and eyes that missed nothing. Said he wanted it to feel like a home, not a hotel. I ran my fingers along the kitchen counter. Granite, but in warm earth tones rather than stark black or white. "He knew I'd be staying here?" "He planned for every contingency," she replied diplomatically. "The kitchen is fully stocked. Your access cards are on the counter. They'll get you into the building, the executive elevator, and your office. The transition team will meet you tomorrow at 9. She hesitated, then added, "I worked with your father for 20 years, Miss Blackwell. He was a fair man, even when he was demanding." "I'm not him," I said quietly. "No," she agreed. "And he didn't want you to be. That's why we're here." She placed a folder on the counter. "Contact information for the entire executive team. I've highlighted the ones you can trust." After she left, I stood alone in the quiet apartment, still trying to process everything that had happened. Less than 12 hours ago, I'd been grading student art projects in my tiny apartment. Now I was standing in a luxury penthouse, preparing to take control of a multi-billion-dollar company I knew almost nothing about. I changed out of my funeral dress into jeans and a sweater, trying to feel more like myself. The flash drive Mr. Peterson had given me sat on the coffee table, both alluring and intimidating. Whatever message my father had left, it was the last communication I would ever receive from him. Taking a deep breath, I plugged it into the laptop that had been provided and opened the single video file it contained. My father's face filled the screen. He looked tired, the cancer having hollowed his cheeks and dimmed the intensity of his gaze. But his voice was steady. "Jenna, if you're watching this, then everything has happened as I arranged. I imagine you're feeling overwhelmed and underprepared. You're probably questioning my judgment and perhaps your own abilities." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "That's good. Self-doubt is useful in moderation. It keeps you honest." He shifted slightly, wincing with discomfort before continuing. "I owe you an explanation, and perhaps an apology as well. When your mother died, I handled it badly. I buried myself in work and left you to navigate your grief alone. Melissa was older, already shaped by my influence, but you You were still becoming. I didn't know how to connect with a child who reminded me so much of what I'd lost. I felt tears forming, but refused to let them fall. This was the most my father had ever spoken about my mother's death. As you grew, I mistook your gentleness for weakness, your creativity for impracticality. I tried to force you into a mold that was never meant for you. When you chose your own path, I saw it as rejection rather than courage. He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. It took me far too long to recognize my mistake. On screen, he reached for a glass of water, his hand trembling slightly. 3 months ago, I discovered irregularities in our European contracts. The details are in the files Diane will provide, but the short version is that Melissa authorized kickbacks to secure deals with several major clients. When questioned, she falsified documentation and blamed subordinates. I closed my eyes briefly. Part of me had hoped there was some misunderstanding, that my father had somehow misinterpreted Melissa's actions. I confronted her privately, he continued. I expected contrition, perhaps an explanation about pressure or competition. Instead, she was proud of her cleverness. Everyone does it, she told me. You just never had the stomach to admit it. He shook his head slowly. In that moment, I realized what I'd created. Not just in Blackwell Industries, but in my own daughter. He leaned forward, his gaze intensifying. Jenna, I don't expect you to run the company the way I did, or the way Melissa would. I expect you to run it better. You'll face resistance, especially from the old guard who've grown comfortable with how things have always been done. Some will try to manipulate you, others will openly challenge your authority. Melissa will almost certainly attempt to undermine you at every turn. The frankness of his assessment was jarring. This wasn't the diplomatic corporate speak I'd expected. This was raw and unfiltered. You'll find allies where you least expect. Them, he continued. Diane knows everyone and everything. Trust her judgment. Marcus in legal has more integrity than anyone I've ever met. Sarah in R&D sees around corners. Her innovations have saved us more than once. The transition team has been handpicked and thoroughly vetted. They'll guide you, but the decisions must be yours. He paused again, looking suddenly older, more vulnerable. I've left you with an impossible task. It isn't fair, and if there were another way, I would have taken it. But Blackwell Industries employs over 15,000 people. Their livelihoods, their families depend on the company surviving and thriving. I couldn't leave it in hands I no longer trusted, no matter how experienced those hands might be. My father straightened in his chair, some of his old authority returning to his posture. You have qualities Melissa never developed: empathy, integrity, the ability to inspire rather than intimidate. Use them. The business world has enough. Sharks. What it needs now are leaders who understand that profit without purpose is meaningless. He reached toward the camera, his expression softening. I wish we had more time. There's so much I never said. So many moments I missed because I was too stubborn to recognize what was right in front of me. I'm proud of you, Jenna. Not for what you'll do with the company, but for who you already are despite my failures as a father. The screen went black, then returned to the desktop. I sat motionless, tears finally falling freely. All those years of seeking his approval, of trying to understand why nothing I did was ever enough. And now, when it was too late for us to build the relationship we might have had, he had seen me clearly at last. I allowed myself 10 minutes to cry, to feel the complicated grief of losing a father I'd never quite known. Then I wiped my face, straightened my shoulders, and opened the folder Diane had left. If I was going to face Melissa and the board tomorrow, I needed to be prepared. The files were meticulous: organization charts, financial summaries, pending, projects, and detailed notes on key personnel. I found the European contracts my father had mentioned, along with internal emails documenting Melissa's attempts to cover her tracks. It was damning evidence, carefully preserved. I stayed up most of the night, absorbing as much as I could, making notes, listing questions. By the time dawn broke over the city skyline, my eyes were burning with fatigue, but my mind was clearer. I showered, dressed in the one professional outfit I'd brought with me, a simple black blazer over a blue blouse and dark jeans, and headed downstairs to meet the car Diane had arranged. Blackwell Tower dominated the downtown skyline, 70 floors of glass and steel that housed the corporate headquarters of my father's empire. Now my empire, according to the will, though it still felt like borrowed clothing that didn't quite fit. The lobby was a hive of morning activity, employees swiping access cards, security personnel monitoring entrances, baristas serving coffee from a high-end cafe in the corner. I felt conspicuously out of place, like an imposter who would be discovered at any moment. "Miss Blackwell." A voice at my elbow made me turn. It was Diane, immaculately dressed and carrying a tablet. "The team is assembled in the executive conference room. I've taken the liberty of preparing a brief introduction." I nodded, grateful for her efficiency. "Thank you, and please, call me Jenna." "As you wish." Her expression remained professional, but something in her eyes softened slightly. "The executive elevator is this way." We rode up in silence, the glass elevator providing sweeping views of the city as it climbed. I tried to project confidence I didn't feel, aware that every employee we passed was watching with undisguised curiosity. News travels fast in corporate environments, and the bombshell from yesterday's will reading had undoubtedly spread throughout the company by now. The conference room occupied the corner of the top floor, with windows on two sides and a massive table that could seat 20. 8 people were already waiting when we entered. 5 men and 3 women, all in their 40s or 50s, all wearing expressions of cautious neutrality. "Good morning," I said, willing my voice not to shake. "Thank you for meeting with me." A distinguished-looking man with silver hair rose from his seat. "Miss Blackwell, I'm Robert Kendrick, Chief Financial Officer. On behalf of the transition team, welcome to Blackwell Industries." One by one, they introduced themselves. Department. Heads from legal, operations, human resources, research and development, marketing and international relations. Their titles and responsibilities blurred together despite my best efforts to memorize them. "Please, sit," I said, taking the chair at the head of the table. My father's chair, I realized belatedly. "I know this situation is unusual for everyone. I won't pretend to have your experience or expertise. What I do have is a commitment to honoring my father's vision while creating a future that reflects our best values, not just our bottom line." I saw eyebrows raise at this, but whether in approval or skepticism, I couldn't tell. "Your father spoke highly of you," said Sarah Chen, the R&D director my father had mentioned in his video. She was perhaps 50, with shrewd eyes behind stylish glasses. "He believed you would bring a fresh perspective." "I'm certainly fresh," I replied with a self-deprecating smile. "My background is in education, not business. I'll be relying heavily on your guidance while I learn." Marcus Alvarez, the legal director, leaned forward slightly. "Miss Blackwell, Jenna, we should address the elephant in the room. Your sister has already contacted several of us individually. She believes your father's decision was made under duress and intends to challenge the will." I wasn't surprised, but the confirmation still stung. "Yes, I expected as much. What's your assessment of her chances?" He exchanged glances with Robert. "The will is solid. Your father was meticulous about documentation, including having his doctor certify his mental competence. However, Melissa has allies on the board who might support an administrative challenge to your leadership." "The board can't override a legal inheritance of shares," Robert added, "but they could make your position extremely difficult." I nodded, taking this in. "And what about the European contracts? The irregularities my father discovered?" A heavy silence fell over the room. Finally, Marcus spoke. We've conducted a quiet internal investigation. The findings are troubling. If they became public, the company could face significant legal and financial repercussions. Not to mention reputational damage, added Elena Vasquez, the marketing director. Our brand is built on reliability and integrity. A scandal of this magnitude could erode client confidence overnight. I looked around the table, studying each face carefully. Let me be clear. I have no intention of burying evidence of wrongdoing, regardless of who was responsible. At the same time, I won't risk the livelihoods of thousands of employees if there's a way to address this ethically without destroying the company. Robert nodded approvingly. A measured approach. We've prepared several options for your consideration. For the next 2 hours, we discussed strategies for containing the damage, while implementing new compliance protocols. The team was knowledgeable and forthcoming, answering my questions without condescension and offering insights without trying to dictate my decisions. By the time we broke for lunch, I was cautiously optimistic about our working relationship. As the others filed out, Sarah Chen remained behind. A word of advice, she said once we were alone. The executive suite is on the 69th floor. Your father's office, your office now, is at the end of the hall. Melissa's is directly across from it. I raised an eyebrow. You're suggesting I should move in immediately? I'm suggesting that symbols matter in corporate culture. The longer that office remains empty, the more it looks like you're hesitating. She adjusted her glasses. Howard Blackwell cast a long shadow. The sooner you establish your own presence, the better. She was right, of course. Putting it off would only fuel the perception that I was intimidated or unprepared. Thank you, I said. I'll head up there now. The executive suite was eerily quiet when I arrived. A receptionist looked up in surprise as I exited the elevator. Miss Blackwell, we weren't expecting you until tomorrow. Plans changed, I said simply. Could you show me to my father's office, please? She hurried around her desk. Of course, Ms. Melissa is in a meeting, but she asked to be notified when you arrived. That won't be necessary, I replied. I'm sure she's very busy. The hallway was lined with portraits of past company leaders, ending with my father's imposing figure. His office door was closed, a simple nameplate reading Howard Blackwell, CEO, the only indicator of what lay beyond. The access code is 1984, the receptionist whispered. Your father's wedding year. I nodded my thanks and entered the code. The door swung open to reveal a space that was quintessentially Howard Blackwell, commanding views of the city, substantial wooden furniture, and walls lined with awards and achievements. It was impressive and intimidating, exactly as he'd intended it to be. I stepped inside, half expecting to find him sitting behind the massive desk, fixing me with that appraising stare I'd grown up dreading. Instead, the room was empty, preserved like a museum exhibit. Even the air felt still, as if it had been holding its breath since his last visit. Well, I murmured to myself, this is happening. I set my bag on a side table and moved to the windows, looking out at the city spread below. From this height, cars looked like toys, people like ants. Was this how my father had seen the world? Everyone and everything reduced to miniatures he could control from his lofty perch? A sound at the door made me turn. Melissa stood in the doorway, her expression a careful mask of professional concern. Making yourself at home already? She asked, her voice precisely calibrated to sound neutral while conveying volumes of judgment. Just getting oriented, I replied, maintaining an equally careful tone. The transition team has been very helpful. She stepped into the office, closing the door behind her. Today she wore a crimson dress that somehow managed to be both corporate appropriate and intimidating, like battle armor disguised as fashion. I've been thinking about our situation, she said, moving to stand at the opposite side of our father's desk. There's a simple solution that would serve everyone's interests. I'm listening, You keep the estate and a generous financial settlement. I take the company. Clean, straightforward, no drawn-out legal battles that would damage the Blackwell name. She smiled thinly. You could fund your little art programs for decades. Isn't that what you really want? The offer was delivered smoothly, reasonably, as if she were proposing a fair compromise rather than attempting to negate our father's final wishes. That's thoughtful of you, I said, maintaining eye contact. But I'll be honoring Dad's decision. Her smile disappeared. You have no idea what you're walking into. The board meets tomorrow. Half of them have known me since I was in college. They respect me. They'll eat you alive. Perhaps, I acknowledged. Or perhaps they'll recognize that our father made a deliberate choice based on what he believed was best for the company's future. She laughed, a sharp, dismissive sound. Don't be naive. This isn't about the company's future. It's about an old man's sentimentality and a daughter who played on his emotions when he was vulnerable. I moved to the desk, resting my hands on its polished surface. I've seen the evidence, Melissa. The European contracts, the falsified documents, the employees who were fired to cover your tracks. The color drained from her face, but she recovered, quickly. Business requires difficult decisions. Dad understood that, even if you don't. Difficult decisions, yes. Illegal ones, unethical ones. I don't think that's what he wanted for his legacy. I straightened. The transition team and I have been discussing options for addressing these issues without destroying the company or your reputation. I'd like you to be part of that conversation. Her eyes narrowed. You're offering me what, exactly? The chance to participate in my own professional execution? I'm offering you the opportunity Dad outlined in his will, a year to demonstrate that you've learned from your mistakes. A chance to be part of rebuilding what was damaged, not just by your actions, but by a corporate culture that enabled them. For a moment, something vulnerable flickered across her face. Uncertainty, perhaps, even a flash of remorse. But it was quickly replaced by the hardened determination I'd seen throughout our childhood. You think you can waltz in here with your high school teacher morality and change how this industry operates? You'll be crushed before you even understand. What hit you? She moved to the door, pausing with her hand on the handle. When the board finishes with you tomorrow, you'll be begging to take my offer. After she left, I sank into my father's chair, feeling its weight and legacy. The desk calendar was still turned to the day he'd last been in the office. A half-finished note in his handwriting sat beside it, something about quarterly projections that now seemed trivial in the shadow of his absence. I opened the desk drawers one by one, familiarizing myself with their contents. In the bottom right drawer, beneath a stack of folders, I found a framed photograph I'd never seen before. It showed a much younger version of my father holding a newborn baby, me, I realized with a start. His expression was tender, vulnerable in a way I couldn't remember ever witnessing. On the back, in my mother's handwriting, Howard with Jenna, first day home. Never seen him so happy. I traced the inscription with my fingertip, a piece of a puzzle I'd been trying to solve my entire life. Had he kept this hidden all these years, this evidence of a connection he'd been unable to maintain after my mother's death? The intercom buzzed, interrupting my thoughts. Miss Blackwell, the board chairman is on line 1. He'd like to move tomorrow's meeting to this afternoon, if you're available. So it begins, I thought. Melissa had wasted no time. Thank you, I replied. Please tell him I'll be ready in an hour. I replaced the photograph in the drawer, but not before taking a picture of it with my phone. Whatever happened next, I wanted to remember that there had been a time when Howard Blackwell looked at me with uncomplicated love. The conference room where the board gathered felt colder than the one I'd met the transition team in earlier, despite being on the same floor with the same expansive views. Perhaps it was the expressions on the 12 faces that stared back at me as I entered, ranging from open skepticism to thinly veiled hostility. with only a couple showing anything close to neutrality. Melissa was already seated near the head of the table, impeccably composed. Beside her sat an older man with a leonine mane of white hair, who I recognized from company photos as William Hargrove, the board chairman and my father's oldest friend. "Miss Blackwell," he said, rising as I approached, "thank you for accommodating our request to meet today. These are unusual circumstances." I took the seat at the head of the table, aware of Melissa's eyes tracking my every movement. "I understand the board has concerns. I'm here to address them directly." Hargrove nodded, resuming his seat. "To be blunt, your father's decision has caught us all by surprise. While we respected Howard immensely, we must consider whether his judgment was affected by his illness." "I appreciate your candor," I replied, meeting his gaze steadily. My father anticipated this reaction. He left detailed documentation explaining his reasoning, including medical certification of his mental competence at the time the will was executed. A murmur ran around the table. Melissa's expression didn't change, but her knuckles whitened where she gripped her pen. "Even so," continued another board member, a sharp-featured woman in her 60s, "the fact remains that you have no experience in this industry." Blackwell Industries is a complex global organization facing significant competitive pressures. This is hardly the time for experimentation. "I agree completely," I said, surprising her. "Which is why I've spent the morning with the transition team my father assembled, reviewing the company's current position and immediate challenges. I've also reviewed the European contract situation in detail." A sudden tension gripped the room. Several board members exchanged glances. "That matter was addressed months ago," Hargrove said carefully. "Was it?" I opened the folder I'd brought with me. "Because the documentation I've reviewed suggests otherwise. It shows a pattern of irregular payments, falsified compliance reports, and retaliatory personnel actions against employees who raised concerns." The sharp-featured woman leaned forward. "These are serious allegations, Miss Blackwell. If you're suggesting impropriety—" "I'm not suggesting anything," I interrupted gently. "I'm stating facts that are thoroughly documented in company records. My father discovered these issues shortly before his diagnosis. He chose to address them privately rather than risk damage to the company's reputation." I glanced at Melissa, whose composed facade was beginning to crack. His decision to revise his will and succession plan was directly connected to these discoveries. He believed that Blackwell Industries needed a fundamental reset of its ethical compass. Hargrove's expression had grown increasingly troubled. "These are matters the board should have been apprised of." "I agree," I said. "And they will be, formally and completely. But first, I wanted to meet with you directly to outline my approach. I have no intention of publicly exposing past wrongdoing if we can implement meaningful reforms and make appropriate restitution where necessary. My priority is protecting the company and its employees while ensuring this never happens again." For the next 30 minutes, I outlined the plan the transition team and I had developed: a thorough internal audit, new compliance protocols, an ethics committee with real authority, and a reorganization of the European division that would remove the most compromised executives without public scandal. As I spoke, I watched the expressions around the table shift from skepticism to consideration. Not acceptance, not yet, but at least they were listening. "This approach has merit," Hargrove acknowledged when I finished, "but it still doesn't address the fundamental concern about leadership experience. The markets won't react well to an untested CEO, regardless of surname." "They might," interjected a younger board member I hadn't heard from before, "if we frame it correctly. Fresh perspective, ethical renewal, a leader who prioritizes sustainability over short-term gains. That narrative could play well with younger investors and consumers." Melissa finally broke her silence. "This is absurd. We're discussing the future of a multi-billion-dollar company, not a PR campaign for a charity initiative." Actually, I said, we're discussing both the company's financial health and its ethical foundation. I don't believe those are separable concerns, and neither did our father. I turned back to Hargrove. I'm not asking for blind trust. I'm asking for the opportunity my father wanted me to have, to learn from the exceptional team he assembled, to address serious issues he identified, and to lead this company in a direction he believed in. The room fell silent as Hargrove studied me, measuring me against some internal standard I couldn't see. Finally, he nodded almost imperceptibly. We'll reconvene tomorrow for a formal vote, he said. In the meantime, I suggest we all review the documentation Miss Blackwell has referenced. As the meeting dispersed, Melissa remained seated, her expression unreadable. When everyone else had left, she finally spoke. You've done your homework. I'll give you that. She gathered her papers methodically. But this isn't over, not by a long shot. I watched her walk out, her heels clicking against the polished floor like a countdown. She was right about one thing. This was just the beginning. The first week passed in a blur of meetings, briefings, and crash courses in corporate governance. Each morning, I woke before dawn in the company apartment, reviewing files until my eyes burned, then spent the days being shuttled from one executive session to another. The transition team was patient but relentless, pushing information at me faster than I could possibly absorb it all. You're holding up better than I expected, Robert remarked on Friday afternoon as we finished reviewing the quarterly projections. Most new CEOs at least pretend to understand everything immediately. Your willingness to admit what you don't know is refreshing. I spent 15 years teaching teenagers, I replied with a tired smile. You learn quickly that pretending expertise only leads to disaster. They can smell insincerity from a mile away. He chuckled, gathering his papers. A useful skill in the boardroom, too, though few would admit it. He hesitated, then added, The board vote went your way, as you know. 8-4. Not unanimous, but decisive enough. I nodded, grateful for the reminder. The formal vote had been a significant hurdle cleared, though the 4 dissenting votes, Melissa's closest allies on the board, meant I still faced substantial internal opposition. William Hargrove was the surprise, Robert continued. Many expected him to side with Melissa given their long history. His support legitimized you in the eyes of several fence-sitters. I still don't understand why he changed his mind, admitted. Robert's expression grew thoughtful. Hargrove and your father were friends for over 40 years. There's a loyalty there that transcends business. If Howard was explicit about his wishes, William would honor them, regardless of his personal reservations. After Robert left, I remained in my father's office. My office now, though it still didn't feel that way. I'd made no changes yet, partly from lack of time, but mostly because it felt presumptuous somehow, as if I were erasing him too quickly. My phone buzzed with a text from Diane. Ms. Melissa requested meeting with legal tomorrow morning, our European contracts. Scheduled for 9 a.m. Your attendance optional but recommended. I sighed, rubbing my temples. Melissa had been conspicuously professional since the board vote, attending required meetings and submitting requested reports with cold efficiency. But she'd avoided direct interaction with me, communicating through assistants and department heads whenever possible. This meeting request was her first direct engagement with the issue that had precipitated our father's decision. I'll be there. I texted back. Please inform Marcus. As the week had progressed, I'd developed a growing respect for the team my father had assembled around me. Marcus Alvarez, the legal director, had proven particularly valuable. Sharp-minded but ethical, he navigated complex issues with a clarity I desperately needed. If Melissa was finally engaging with the European contract situation, I wanted him firmly in my corner. The weekend offered little respite. I spent Saturday at the apartment, wading through more reports and preparing for what promised to be a contentious meeting. On Sunday, needing to clear my head, I made an impulsive decision to visit my classroom at Westridge High. The school was quiet, most teachers taking advantage of the weekend, but my classroom door was unlocked as always. I stood in the doorway, taking in the familiar space, student artwork covering the walls, pottery wheels in the corner, the lingering smell of clay and paint. For the first time since my father's death, I felt grounded, connected to the person I'd been before everything changed. I moved to my desk, running my fingers over the chipped wooden surface where I'd graded countless assignments and had heart-to-heart talks with troubled students. My substitute teacher had kept everything organized, with neat stacks of student work awaiting review. I picked up a portfolio from my advanced placement class, Zach's work, according to the label. Opening it revealed a series of charcoal sketches exploring themes of identity and transformation. The technical skill was impressive, but what struck me was the emotional honesty in each piece. This was why I'd become a teacher, to witness and nurture this kind of authentic expression. I thought I might find you here. I turned to find Principal Rivera standing in the doorway, her expression both surprised and concerned. "Carmen," I greeted her with a smile, "just checking in on things." She entered the room, glancing around at the student work. "When you called about extending your emergency leave, I assumed it was still about your father's passing. Then I saw the business section of yesterday's paper." She raised an eyebrow. "CEO of Blackwell Industries is quite a career change from high school. Art teacher." I sighed, sinking into my desk chair. "It wasn't exactly planned." "So I gathered." She pulled up a student chair, sitting across from me. "Are you okay, Jenna? This is a lot to process in a short time." The simple kindness in her question nearly undid me. After a week of corporate politics and carefully measured responses, the straightforward concern felt like a gift. "I don't know," I admitted. "It's overwhelming. Everyone's watching, waiting for me to either miracle the company into some new golden age or crash and burn spectacularly. There's no middle ground." Carmen nodded thoughtfully. "Sounds like teaching, actually. 30 pairs of eyes on you every hour, each one carrying different expectations and needs. The stakes just have more zeros attached now." I laughed despite myself. I hadn't thought of it that way. "You're good with people, Jenna. You always have been. You see what they need, sometimes before they know it themselves." She gestured to the classroom around us. "That's why you're effective here. Maybe that's what your father saw too." Her words echoed what my father had said in his final message to me. The connection between my teaching and my new role hadn't seemed obvious until now, but perhaps there was more overlap than I'd realized. "I miss this," I said softly. "The simplicity of it. Creating something beautiful, helping students find their voice." "Those skills translate," Carmen replied. "Maybe that's exactly what a corporate environment needs. Someone who knows how to nurture potential rather than just demand results." I considered this, looking around at the student artwork that covered the walls, each piece representing hours of effort, frustration, breakthroughs, and growth. My students didn't arrive as finished artists. They developed through guidance, challenge, and support. Perhaps a company wasn't so different. "Your substitute is doing well," Carmen continued, "but the students ask about you. They miss your approach." She hesitated, then added, "Whatever you decide about your future, you'll always have a place here." The offer touched me deeply. In a week where everything familiar had been upended, this connection to my previous life felt like an anchor in stormy seas. I left the school with a clearer mind than I'd had in days. Carmen's perspective had shifted something in my thinking, not just about the challenge ahead, but about how to approach it. I'd been trying to become the CEO my father had been, to fill a role I hadn't been trained for, but perhaps that wasn't what he'd wanted at all. Monday morning arrived with gray skies and a steady drizzle that matched the mood in the conference room where Marcus and I waited for Melissa. He'd arrived early to brief me on the latest developments, his expression more serious than usual. She's bringing Jeffrey Winters as her personal counsel, he informed me, arranging documents on the table. He's aggressive, well-connected, and not particularly concerned with ethical niceties. I nodded, absorbing this information. What's her play here? She has to know the evidence is solid. My guess, she's looking for a settlement. Marcus adjusted his glasses. A financial package in exchange for her silence about the company's involvement. She can frame it as taking responsibility for rogue employees while protecting herself from personal liability. And if we refuse? She could go public, claim whistleblower status, and position herself as the one who tried to fix things once she discovered them. He shrugged. It would be messy for everyone, but particularly damaging to the company. Before I could respond, the door opened. Melissa entered, impeccably dressed as always, followed by a sharp-featured man in his 50s carrying an expensive leather briefcase. Neither smiled as they took seats opposite us. Jenna, Marcus, Melissa acknowledged coolly. This is Jeffrey Winters, my personal attorney. I nodded. Thank you for meeting with us, Melissa. I believe we all want to resolve this situation in a way that protects the company and its employees. Winters cleared his throat. Let's be direct. My client has been placed in an untenable position. After years of loyal service to Blackwell Industries, she finds herself sidelined and implicitly accused of misconduct based on selective interpretation of complex business decisions. Marcus remained impassive. The documentation speaks for itself, Mr. Winters. The irregular payments to European officials, the falsified compliance reports, the termination of employees who raised concerns. These aren't matters of interpretation. Business in the European market operates under different cultural norms, Winters countered smoothly. What might appear improper through an American legal lens is simply how deals are facilitated in certain regions. I leaned forward slightly. Let's be clear. We're talking about violations of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, falsification of corporate records, and retaliatory termination. These aren't cultural misunderstandings. They're serious legal and ethical breaches. Melissa's composed expression flickered briefly. You've been CEO for a week, Jenna. Don't pretend you understand the complexities of international business or the pressures of quarterly expectations. The board demanded growth in the European market after 3 flat years. I delivered it. At what cost? I asked quietly. At the cost necessary, she replied, her voice hardening. That's business. Dad understood that, even if he didn't always like it. I studied my sister's face, searching for some sign of regret or recognition that lines had been crossed. I found none. What exactly are you proposing, Mr. Winters? Marcus interjected, bringing us back to the matter at hand. The attorney opened his briefcase, removing a bound document. Ms. Blackwell is prepared to take full responsibility for overseeing the European division during the period in question. In exchange, she would receive an appropriate severance package reflecting her years of service and a mutual non-disclosure agreement protecting both parties' interests. He slid the document across the table. Marcus picked it up, scanning it quickly before passing it to me. The terms were breathtaking in their audacity. 3 years' salary, stock options, and a consulting arrangement that would keep Melissa connected to the company while insulating her from any legal consequences. This isn't taking responsibility, I said after reviewing the proposal. This is being rewarded for misconduct. Melissa's professional mask slipped, revealing the anger beneath. You have no idea what you're doing, do you? This company operates in 27 countries, each with their own regulatory environment and business culture. The European division represents 30% of our annual revenue. If this becomes public, we lose contracts, face regulatory investigations in multiple jurisdictions, and watch our stock price collapse. I'm well aware of the stakes, I replied, keeping my voice level. That's why we've already begun implementing a comprehensive remediation plan. Internal audit of all international operations, new compliance protocols, ethics training for all, executives, and a restructuring of the European division leadership. Her eyes narrowed. Without consulting me? I'm still COO. The transition team recommended immediate action to contain the damage. The board approved the plan 2 days ago. I met her gaze steadily. You were copied on the memo. A tense silence filled the room. Winters leaned over to whisper something to Melissa, who gave a short, sharp nod in response. It seems we have different perspectives on resolving this situation, he said, gathering his papers. Perhaps we should reconvene after everyone has had time to consider the implications more fully. I exchanged glances with Marcus, who gave me an almost imperceptible nod. Before we adjourn, I said, I'd like to make a counterproposal. Melissa remains with the company in a revised capacity, special advisor on European operations, helping to implement the new compliance framework. Full cooperation with the internal investigation, including acknowledgement of personal responsibility, where appropriate. No financial package beyond standard compensation, but also no public disclosure or legal action if the cooperation is complete and genuine. Melissa stared at me in disbelief. You're offering me a demotion and public humiliation. I'm offering you the chance Dad wanted you to have. To learn from mistakes and be part of rebuilding what was damaged. To demonstrate that you understand why this matters, not just legally, but ethically. How noble, she replied, her voice dripping with sarcasm. The art teacher delivering moral lessons to the experienced executive. Why would I possibly accept that? I maintained eye contact, keeping my voice calm but firm. Because the alternative is worse. If you refuse to cooperate, we'll have no choice but to disclose our findings to regulatory authorities. The board will support this decision. I've already discussed it with Chairman Hargrove. The color drained from her face. You're bluffing. I'm not. The company's long-term health depends on addressing this properly, not burying it with settlements and NDAs. I softened my tone slightly. This isn't about punishing you, Melissa. It's about fixing a broken system that allowed these decisions to seem acceptable in the first place. She gathered her things, movements stiff with suppressed fury. I'll need time to consider my options. Of course, I replied. We'll expect your response by Wednesday. After they left, Marcus let out a long breath. That was unexpected. I thought you'd take the settlement route. That's what she was. Counting on, I said. The easy way out, with her reputation intact and a golden parachute as a bonus. I shook my head. Dad didn't leave me the company to continue business as usual. He studied me with newfound respect. No, I suppose he didn't. The rest of the day passed in a flurry of meetings and decisions. By late afternoon, I was mentally exhausted, but determined to complete one more task before leaving. I'd been putting it off all week, but after the confrontation with Melissa, it felt more urgent than ever. I asked Diane to clear my schedule for the final hour of the day and closed my office door. Then I began the process of making the space my own. I didn't remove my father's awards or achievements. Those were part of the company's history. But I rearranged the furniture to create a more open, accessible arrangement. The massive desk no longer dominated the room like a barrier. Instead, it faced a small seating area where conversations could happen on equal footing. From my bag, I removed 3 framed pieces of student artwork I'd brought from my classroom, abstract explorations of growth and transformation that felt symbolic of this transitional period. I hung them on the wall opposite my father's corporate accolades, creating a visual balance between the company's past and its potential future. Finally, I placed the photograph I'd found in my father's desk, the one of him holding me as a newborn, on the corner of the desk where I could see it daily. Not as a reminder of what I'd lost, but of the connection that had existed before. Complications and expectations had created distance between us. As I finished, Diane knocked softly and entered with a folder. The preliminary report from the compliance team, she explained, placing it on my desk. And something else you should see. She handed me a printout of an internal company email sent an hour earlier. It was from Melissa to the entire executive team, excluding me. Effective immediately, I will be taking a 2-week leave of absence to address personal matters. During this time, I've asked Robert Kendrick to oversee my regular duties. I remain committed to Blackwell Industries and its continued success. I looked up at Diane, who raised an eyebrow meaningfully. The rumor mill is already churning. Some say she's preparing a legal challenge to your authority. Others think she's interviewing with competitors. Or maybe she's actually taking time. To reflect on her options, I suggested, though without much conviction. Diane's expression made it clear she thought this unlikely. There's one more thing. William Hargrove called. He'd like to meet with you privately tomorrow morning at his club. He was quite insistent. I nodded, wondering what new challenge this represented. Hargrove's support had been crucial during the board vote, but his loyalties were complex and deep-rooted. If Melissa had approached him. Thank you, Diane. Please confirm the meeting. After she left, I stood at the window watching the city lights come on as dusk settled. In just 1 week, I'd confronted the board, begun addressing the European contract scandal, and faced down my sister's attempt to outmaneuver me. Each challenge had seemed insurmountable until I was in the middle of it, finding resources and resolve I hadn't known I possessed. My phone buzzed with a text from Carmen. "How's the corporate world treating you?" I smiled, typing back, "Challenging, but not impossible," using more teaching skills than I expected. Her reply came quickly. "Not surprised. The best CEOs are really just teachers with better outfits. Your students are rooting for you." The simple message bolstered my spirits more than any corporate pep talk could have. I took a final look around the transformed office. Not Howard, Blackwell's space anymore, but not entirely mine yet either. Something in between, evolving day by day. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, beginning with whatever Hargrove wanted to discuss. Melissa's next move remained uncertain, and the work of reforming the company's culture had barely begun. But for the first time since reading my father's will, I didn't feel like an imposter playing a role. I was finding my own way forward, one decision at a time. The Harbor Club occupied the top 3 floors of one of the city's oldest buildings, its membership limited to a carefully curated selection of the business and political elite. As the elevator ascended, I straightened my jacket and mentally prepared for whatever Hargrove had in store. The maitre d' greeted me with practiced deference. "Miss Blackwell, welcome. Mr. Hargrove is waiting in the Palmer Room. This way, please." He led me through the main dining area, where breakfast was being served to clusters of powerful men and women engaged in quiet conversation. I felt their eyes follow me. The newcomer, the anomaly, the art teacher suddenly at the helm of one of the city's cornerstone businesses. William Hargrove stood as I entered the private dining room, impeccably dressed in a bespoke suit that spoke of old money and established power. At 72, he remained imposing, tall and straight-backed, with penetrating blue eyes that had evaluated countless business proposals and people throughout his long career. "Jenna," he greeted me, gesturing to the chair across from him. "Thank you for coming. I hope you don't mind the early hour." "Not at all," I replied, taking the offered seat. "I understand this club's breakfasts are legendary." He smiled slightly. "Howard always preferred the dinner service, but I find mornings more conducive to clear thinking." He signaled to a hovering waiter who immediately poured coffee into fine bone china cups. "I'll come straight to the point. I've known your family for over 40 years. I was there when Howard married your mother and when he buried her. I watched Melissa grow up, and I noticed your absence as you chose a different path." I sipped my coffee, waiting for him to continue. "When Howard changed his will, he came to me first, not as board chairman, but as his friend. He wanted my perspective." Hargrove's expression grew contemplative. "I told him he was making a mistake. That Melissa, despite her aggressive methods, was the logical choice to continue his legacy. "What changed your mind?" I asked quietly. "Two things. First, the evidence he showed me about the European contracts. Not just the legal breaches, but Melissa's response when confronted. Her lack of remorse troubled him deeply." He paused as the waiter delivered plates of perfectly prepared eggs Benedict. "The second was his description of visiting your classroom. He said he saw you create something he never could, a space where people felt safe enough to take risks and grow." I nearly dropped my fork. "He told you about that?" Hargrove nodded. He was quite moved by it, said it made him realize how narrow his vision had been, for the company and for you. We ate in silence for a few moments, the revelation settling between us. Finally, Hargrove spoke again. "Melissa came to see me yesterday. She believes you're on a vendetta to discredit her, that you've manipulated the situation to your advantage." He studied me carefully. "She wants my help in bringing a formal challenge to your leadership at the next board meeting." My heart sank, though I wasn't surprised. "And what did you tell her?" "That I would consider it." He set down his utensils precisely. "Before I make that decision, I wanted to hear directly from you. Not about the European contracts. Those facts are clear enough, but about your vision for Blackwell Industries. Howard built this company on reliability and excellence. What do you intend to build on that foundation?" The question was fair, but daunting. A week ago, I'd barely understood the scope of the company I'd inherited. Now I was being asked to articulate its future. I took a deep breath, organizing my thoughts. Blackwell Industries has always excelled at efficiency and innovation, creating products that solve problems and systems that work seamlessly. What's been missing is purpose beyond profit, a connection to the human impact of our work. Hargrove's expression remained neutral, but he nodded slightly, encouraging me to continue. "I envision a company that maintains its commitment to excellence while developing a stronger ethical framework, one that values transparency, sustainability, and genuine social responsibility. Not as marketing strategies, but as core principles that guide every decision from the executive suite to the factory floor." "Noble sentiments," he remarked, "but vague. How would this translate to concrete business operations?" I leaned forward, warming to the subject. "I've been reviewing our product development pipeline. We have technologies that could be adapted to address critical needs in underserved markets. Water purification systems for regions facing shortages, modular housing components that could be deployed after natural disasters, educational tools that could transform access in remote areas." His eyebrow raised slightly. "Those sound like charity initiatives, not profit centers." "They're both," I countered. "These are growing markets with significant long-term potential. By establishing ourselves now as partners rather than just vendors, we build relationships and infrastructure that position us advantageously for decades to come. Meanwhile, we're solving real problems and creating goodwill that enhances our brand globally." Hargrove considered this, his fingers tapping thoughtfully on the tablecloth. "And the European situation? How does that fit into your vision?" "It's our first test case," I replied. "We have an opportunity to demonstrate that we can acknowledge mistakes, make amends where necessary, and implement systems that prevent recurrence. How we handle this will set the tone for everything that follows." "Including what happens with Melissa?" I met his gaze directly. "Yes. I offered her a path to redemption, a chance to be part of the solution rather than just the source of the problem. Whether she takes it is her choice." He nodded slowly. "Howard said you had a backbone under that gentle exterior. It seems he was right." He signaled for the check. "I won't support Melissa's challenge at the board meeting. Not because of family loyalty, but because I believe your approach, while unconventional, may be exactly what Blackwell Industries needs at this juncture." Relief washed through me, though I tried not to show it too obviously. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," he warned. "The road ahead won't be easy. There are those on the board and in executive leadership who will resist change, especially if it threatens established power structures or comfortable practices. Melissa has allies, and they won't simply fade away because of one vote." "I understand," I said. "I'm not naive about the challenges." "No," he agreed, studying me with new respect. "I don't believe you are." He rose, signaling our meeting, was concluding. "One piece of advice, if I may. Howard built this company through force of will and relentless focus. You'll need to find your own leadership style, one that draws on your strengths rather than attempting to replicate his." As we walked toward the elevator, he added, "Your father and I didn't always agree, but I respected him immensely. In his final weeks, he seemed more at peace than I'd seen him since your mother passed. I believe you were part of that peace." The simple statement touched me deeply, affirming something I'd hoped but hadn't dared fully believe. "Thank you for telling me that," I said quietly as the elevator arrived. He nodded once, formal again. "Good luck, Jenna. I suspect you'll need less of it than most think." As I left the Harbor Club, the morning sun was breaking through the clouds, casting long shadows across the city streets. My phone buzzed with messages from Diane, meeting reminders, document approvals needed, a journalist requesting an interview, about my unexpected rise to power. The real work was just beginning, and somewhere Melissa was planning her next move. But for the first time since this journey began, I felt a genuine sense of possibility, not just that I might survive this challenge, but that I might actually transform it into something meaningful and lasting. My father had given me more than a company. He'd given me the chance to prove what I'd always believed, that kindness wasn't weakness, that integrity mattered more than expediency, and that teaching wasn't just about imparting knowledge, but about creating spaces where growth could happen. As I texted Diane that I was on my way back to the office, I smiled at the thought of what lay ahead. Not just challenges and resistance, but the chance to build something that honored my father's legacy while reflecting my own values. A company transformed not by force, but by purpose, guided not by fear, but by possibility. The art teacher in mind, me recognized this for what it was, a blank canvas waiting for the first bold stroke. The quarterly earnings call loomed like a storm on the horizon. 3 months had passed since I'd inherited Blackwell Industries, and now came the moment of truth, my first public presentation to investors, analysts, and business media. The stakes couldn't be higher. "These are the updated projections," Robert said, sliding a folder across my desk. "We've adjusted for the restructuring costs in the European division, but the core business performance remains strong." I scanned the numbers, noting the patterns we'd discussed in previous meetings. The clean energy subsidiary is outperforming expectations. Robert nodded. "The market is responding well to the strategic shift you initiated. The partnership with those solar developers you insisted on has already generated significant goodwill and early contracts." I smiled, remembering the resistance I'd faced when proposing that Blackwell Industries pivot toward sustainable energy solutions. The board had been skeptical, the executive team concerned about short-term costs, but I'd held firm, drawing on research from Sarah's R&D team that showed enormous growth potential in the sector. "What about the questions we're anticipating?" I asked, turning to Diane, who was coordinating the communications strategy. "We've prepared responses for the obvious ones: the European situation, the leadership transition, the new ethics protocols." She handed me a neatly organized briefing document. "The most challenging will likely come from Trevor Baldwin at Morningstar Capital. He's been publicly skeptical about your appointment from day one." I nodded, remembering the scathing analysis Baldwin had published shortly after the will reading. The art teacher CEO, Blackwell's sentimental mistake, had been the headline, followed by a detailed critique of my lack of business experience and predictions of imminent failure. "He'll be looking for any sign of weakness," Marcus added from his position by the window. "Be prepared for pointed questions about the drop in European revenue following the compliance overhaul." "I'm not hiding from that," I replied. "We knew there would be short-term costs to addressing the ethical issues. The question is whether we can tell a compelling story about long-term benefits." The intercom buzzed, and Diane answered it. "Ms. Jenna, Sarah Chen is here with the prototype you requested." I brightened immediately. "Send her in." Sarah entered carrying a sleek metal case, her usual serious expression softened by a hint of excitement. "We finished the final testing this morning. It exceeded all performance benchmarks." She placed the case on the conference table and opened it to reveal what looked like an ordinary water filter, though slightly more compact than commercial models. "This doesn't look revolutionary," Robert observed skeptically. "That's intentional," Sarah replied, lifting the device. "It needs to be familiar enough that people in developing regions can use it intuitively, but what's inside is unlike anything currently on the market." She proceeded to demonstrate how the filter could transform contaminated water into potable water using a fraction of the energy required by existing systems, at a manufacturing cost that would make it accessible to non-governmental organizations and developing nations. "This isn't just a product," I explained to Robert as he examined the filter. "It's the cornerstone of the narrative we're presenting tomorrow. Blackwell Industries isn't just changing how we do business, we're changing what business we're in." He nodded slowly, beginning to understand. "From industrial systems to human solutions." "Exactly. We're still an engineering and manufacturing company at our core, but now we're directing those capabilities toward challenges that matter: clean water, renewable energy, accessible housing." Marcus cleared his throat. "It's a compelling vision. But will investors buy it?" Many of them backed Blackwell specifically because of its traditional focus and reliable returns. "That's why the numbers matter," I acknowledged. "We need to show that ethical business can also be profitable business, that doing good and doing well aren't mutually exclusive." As the team continued discussing strategy for the earnings call, my phone buzzed with a text. I glanced down to see a message from an unexpected source. "Melissa, we need to talk, privately, today." I hadn't seen my sister in nearly 2 months. After declining my offer of a revised role, she had officially resigned from Blackwell Industries, citing philosophical differences with current leadership. The business press had speculated wildly about family drama and corporate power struggles, but both of us had maintained public silence on the matter. "I have to step out for an hour," I told the team after they finished the briefing. "I'll review the final presentation when I return." Melissa had suggested meeting at a small cafe, several blocks from Blackwell Tower, neutral territory, away from corporate eyes and ears. I arrived to find her already seated in a corner booth, a cup of untouched coffee in front of her. She looked different somehow, still impeccably dressed, but less rigid, less armored. When she saw me, she didn't stand or offer a handshake, just gestured to the seat opposite her. "Thank you for coming," she said as I sat down. "I know you're busy preparing for tomorrow." "The earnings call," I nodded. "News travels fast." "I still have friends in the company." A ghost of her old smile appeared briefly. Not everyone embraced the new regime. A server appeared, and I ordered a tea, waiting until he departed before responding. "Is that what this is about? Are you gathering intelligence for some kind of counteroffensive?" She sighed, running a finger around the rim of her coffee cup. "Always so direct. That's one thing that hasn't changed about you." "What has?" I asked, genuinely curious. She considered the question seriously. "You carry yourself differently now. More confidence, less defensiveness. Power suits you, as much as I hate to admit it." The compliment, if that's what it was, took me by surprise. "Thank you, I think." Don't get used to it, she replied, though without the sharp edge that would have accompanied such a comment 3 months ago. I didn't ask you here to exchange pleasantries. Why did you? She reached into her handbag and removed a flash drive, placing it carefully on the table between us. Because I found something you need to see. I made no move to take it. What is it? After I left Blackwell, I was approached by Meridian Global. They were interested in my knowledge of our European operations, particularly the aspects that had caused complications. Meridian was one of our largest competitors, known for aggressive tactics and occasional ethical corner-cutting. The implication was clear. Are you telling me you've been sharing company information with a competitor? What? I kept my voice low but couldn't hide my dismay. No, she replied firmly. I'm telling you they wanted me to. They offered a consulting arrangement that would have been very lucrative. During the discussions, their CEO shared some interesting intelligence about Blackwell's European contracts. She tapped the flash drive. It seems the irregular payments didn't originate with me. They were established practice, carefully hidden in the accounting systems, dating back at least 5 years before I took over the division. I stared at her, processing the implications. You're saying Dad knew that he was responsible? She shook her head. Not directly, no. The system was established by Edward Vance when he ran international operations. Dad may have suspected, but there's no evidence he authorized it. Edward Vance had been my father's right-hand man for decades before retiring 2 years ago. He'd been a mentor to Melissa, the one who had groomed her to take over the European division. But you continued the practice, I said quietly. For the first time, Melissa's composure cracked slightly. Yes, when I discovered it, Vance explained it as regional business customs that were necessary to remain competitive. He assured me it was carefully managed to minimize risk. And you believed him. She met my gaze directly. I wanted to believe him. It made everything easier. The growth targets, the competitive pressures, the board expectations. I told myself it was just how business worked in certain markets. The server returned with my tea. We sat in silence until he departed again. Why are you telling me this now? I asked finally. Because Meridian is planning to use this information against Blackwell. They've been gathering evidence, including communications that implicate current board members who were aware of the practice. She pushed the flash drive closer to me. Everything they shared with me is here, along with what I've been able to piece together independently. I picked up the drive, turning it over in my hand. Why would you warn us? From where I'm sitting? This looks like vindication for you. Proof that you were just continuing an established practice rather than initiating ethical breaches. Melissa was quiet for a long moment, staring into her coffee as if searching for words. When Dad changed his will, I was furious. I felt betrayed, humiliated, robbed of what I'd worked my entire life to achieve. I wanted to fight back, to prove he'd made a terrible mistake. She looked up, her expression more vulnerable than I'd seen since we were children. But these past 2 months away from Blackwell have given me perspective I didn't have before. I've had to ask myself some uncomfortable questions about who I became in that environment, about the choices I made to succeed at any cost. I watched her carefully, looking for signs of manipulation or calculation, finding instead what appeared to be genuine reflection. The company has been my entire identity for so long, she continued. I defined my worth by my position, my achievements, my power. When that was suddenly gone, I had to face the reality of who I am without those external markers of success. And who is that? I asked softly. A small, sad smile crossed her face. I'm still figuring that out. But I know I don't want to. Be the person who watches from the sidelines as a competitor destroys what Dad built, even if part of me still feels he chose wrong. I sipped my tea, absorbing her words and weighing their sincerity. What do you suggest we do with this information? You need to get ahead of it. Conduct a thorough investigation, identify everyone involved, and take decisive action before Meridian goes public. It won't be pleasant. There are people you trust who may be implicated, but it's the only way to control the narrative. The strategic advice was sound, exactly what the Melissa I'd known would recommend. But there was something different in her tone, a concern that seemed to extend beyond corporate reputation to the human impact of what was coming. Why not just take this to Meridian's board? I asked. Expose their CEO's attempt to engage in corporate espionage? She shook her head. It would be my word against his, and I'm hardly viewed as a reliable source given recent events. Besides, it wouldn't address the underlying issue at Blackwell. I nodded slowly, recognizing the truth in her assessment. Thank you for bringing this to me. It couldn't have been easy. It wasn't, she admitted. But it's the right thing to do, which is apparently something I'm learning to consider more carefully these days. She gathered her things, preparing to leave. For what it's worth, you're doing better than I expected. The Clean Energy Initiative was smart. Even some of my contacts at Meridian were impressed. Coming from Melissa, this was high praise indeed. I appreciate that. She stood, then hesitated. The earnings call tomorrow. Baldwin from Morningstar will try to trap you on the European numbers. He's been briefed by someone with detailed knowledge of our internal projections. Another gift from Meridian? Likely. Just be prepared. As she turned to go, I made a spontaneous decision. Would you be willing to consult on this investigation? Not officially, but as someone who understands the systems and people involved? She looked genuinely surprised. You'd trust me with this? I think you've earned at least the chance to help fix what went wrong, I replied. Besides, no one knows the European operation better than you do. Something shifted in her expression, a complicated mix of emotions I couldn't fully interpret. I'll think about it, she said finally. Let me know when you've reviewed the files. After she left, I sat alone with my cooling tea, turning the flash drive over in my hand. If what Melissa had shared was accurate, we were facing a much bigger challenge than I'd anticipated. The ethical breaches weren't isolated incidents, but systemic problems that had been normalized over years. The earnings call suddenly seemed like just the beginning of a much longer, more difficult journey than I'd imagined. Back at Blackwell Tower, I gathered Marcus, Robert, and Sarah in my office, sharing the disturbing information Melissa had provided. Their reactions ranged from shock to grim confirmation of long-held suspicions. We need to pull in the forensic accounting team immediately, Marcus said, already making notes. If board members are implicated, this changes everything about our disclosure obligations. Robert looked pale. The timing couldn't be worse. If this breaks before the earnings call, it won't, I assured him. Meridian is still gathering evidence. According to Melissa, they're planning a coordinated campaign, likely timed to maximize damage to our stock price. Can we trust her? Assessment? Sarah asked bluntly. This could be misdirection, a way to create internal chaos before a critical market event. It was a fair question, one I'd asked myself repeatedly since the cafe. I believe she's being truthful, I said, after a moment. Not from some sudden change of heart, but because her own reputation is tied to Blackwell's legacy. She doesn't want to see it destroyed, even if she's no longer at the helm. Marcus nodded slowly. That tracks with what I know of her character. Pride has always been her defining trait. Pride in the Blackwell name, in what your father built. So what's our next move? Robert asked, ever practical. I took a deep breath, organizing my thoughts. We proceed on parallel tracks. First, a confidential investigation into the full scope of the problem, led by an independent third party to ensure credibility. Second, we prepare for the earnings call as planned, focusing on our vision for the future while being transparent about the challenges we're addressing. And if Baldwin raises specific questions about the European contracts? Sarah pressed. I'll be honest without being self-destructive. We've already acknowledged there were compliance issues we're addressing. I won't reveal new information until we have a complete picture and a comprehensive response plan. The team dispersed to implement our strategy, leaving me alone with the weight of what we'd discovered. I moved to the window, looking out at the city as evening descended. Lights were coming on in office buildings and apartments, each representing lives that would be affected by the decisions I made in the coming days. My phone buzzed with a text from Carmen. "Students finished the mural today. Thought you'd want to see it." Attached was a photo of a vibrant wall painting that had transformed a dingy school corridor into an explosion of color and possibility. The project had been my last initiative before leaving, a collaborative effort involving students from diverse backgrounds, many of whom had never seen themselves as artists before. The image provided a powerful reminder of why my father had chosen me for this role, not despite my background in education, but because of it. I'd spent years creating spaces where young people could discover their capabilities, take risks, and learn from mistakes. Perhaps that was exactly what Blackwell Industries needed now, not just damage control, but transformation. A culture where ethical behavior was valued over expedient results, where problems were addressed openly rather than buried in accounting. Tricks. The earnings call would be just the first test of whether that vision could withstand market pressures and competitive threats. But as I studied the student mural, its bold colors and fearless energy, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. This challenge wasn't just about preserving a company. It was about reimagining what it could become. I slept little that night, reviewing the presentation materials until the numbers and projections blurred before my eyes. By morning, I felt strangely calm, not from confidence that everything would go smoothly, but from clarity about what mattered most. The conference room was prepared for the video call, with technical staff ensuring connections were stable, and the executive team arranged behind me in a show of unified leadership. As we waited for the call to begin, Robert leaned in close. "The preliminary market is favorable," he murmured. "Our pre-release guidance set appropriate expectations." I nodded, straightening my notes one final time. I'd chosen to wear a blue dress rather than the corporate gray or black that had been suggested, a small but deliberate choice to distinguish my leadership style. The screen flickered to life, showing the faces of key investors and analysts waiting to dissect our performance and strategy. I recognized Trevor Baldwin immediately. Mid-50s, razor-sharp eyes behind expensive glasses, his expression already skeptical. "Good morning," I began, my voice steady. "Thank you for joining Blackwell Industries' quarterly earnings call. Before we review the financial results, I want to acknowledge that this has been a period of significant transition for our company." I paused, making eye contact with several key analysts through the camera. When I became CEO 3 months ago, many questioned whether an educator could successfully lead a global engineering and manufacturing firm. It was a fair question, one I asked myself repeatedly in those early days. A ripple of response moved. Through the virtual audience, slight shifts in posture, subtle changes in expression. I had their attention. What I've discovered is that leadership transcends industry-specific expertise. It requires vision, integrity, and the ability to inspire others toward a common purpose. These are skills I honed in the classroom, working with young people who taught me as much as I taught them. I gestured to the executive team behind me. I'm fortunate to be surrounded by brilliant individuals with deep technical and market knowledge. My role isn't to replicate their expertise, but to chart a course that leverages their talents toward meaningful goals. Baldwin's expression remained skeptical, but others were nodding slightly. I moved into the financial review, presenting the numbers clearly and without defensive qualifications. When I reached the European results, I addressed the issue directly. As previously disclosed, we identified compliance concerns in our European operations and have implemented comprehensive reforms. This resulted in a temporary reduction in regional revenue as we terminated certain relationships and established new protocols. However, we're already seeing signs of recovery as clients respond positively to our renewed commitment to ethical business practices. I continued to our strategic initiatives, highlighting the clean energy partnerships, the water purification technology, and our investments in sustainable manufacturing processes. Throughout the presentation, I emphasized the connection between purpose and profit, innovation and impact. When we opened for questions, Baldwin was predictably the first to raise his hand. Ms. Blackwell, your predecessors established Blackwell Industries as a leader in traditional industrial systems. Now you're pivoting toward what some might call social impact initiatives. Aren't you concerned about alienating core investors who bought into a very different value proposition? The question was pointed but fair. I leaned forward slightly, engaging directly with his challenge. Mr. Baldwin, I understand your concern. Change always carries risk, but I'd challenge the premise that we're abandoning our core identity. Blackwell has always been an engineering solutions company. What's evolving is our understanding of which problems most urgently need solving. I gestured to the screen showing our financial projections. The market for renewable energy infrastructure will exceed $2 trillion globally by 2030. Clean water technology represents another massive growth opportunity. These aren't charity initiatives, they're smart business investments in sectors with exponential growth potential. Baldwin pressed further. Your European division shows a 22% decrease in revenue year over year. Sources suggest this is directly related to the termination of arrangements that facilitated business in challenging markets. How do you respond to accusations that your ethical reforms are simply naivety about how global business operates? Here it was, the trap Melissa had warned about. Baldwin clearly had inside information about the European operations, though not yet the full picture Melissa had revealed about the systemic nature of the problems. I took a measured breath before responding. Mr. Baldwin, there's nothing naive about recognizing that short-term gains achieved through questionable means ultimately destroy more value than they create. The practices we terminated in Europe exposed Blackwell to significant legal, financial, and reputational risks. I maintained steady eye contact through the camera. What would be truly naive is believing that cutting ethical corners is necessary for business success. Our preliminary Q4 data shows European new contract acquisitions up 18% from Q3, with clients specifically citing our transparency and compliance commitments as differentiating factors in their selection process. This last point, based on very recent data Sarah had provided that morning, seemed to catch Baldwin off guard. He paused, recalibrating his approach. Your father built this company through aggressive expansion and unsentimental business decisions, he noted. Do you believe he would support this dramatic shift in corporate philosophy? The question was designed to be personal, to undermine my authority by invoking my father's legacy against me. 3 months ago, it might have worked. Now, I felt only clarity about my response. My father built Blackwell Industries to solve problems through innovative engineering. In his final months, he recognized that the greatest problems facing our world, and the greatest business opportunities, lie in addressing fundamental human needs and environmental challenges. I smiled slightly. He also recognized that leadership sometimes requires evolution, the courage to move beyond comfortable patterns toward new possibilities. The decision to appoint me as CEO wasn't about maintaining the status quo, but about catalyzing necessary change. Baldwin seemed prepared to press further, but another analyst jumped in with questions about our R&D investments in renewable technologies. The conversation shifted to concrete business strategies rather than philosophical debates about leadership. By the time the call concluded 90 minutes later, I felt drained but satisfied. We had presented our results honestly, addressed challenges directly, and articulated a compelling vision for Blackwell's future. The initial market response was cautiously positive, not euphoric, but notably stronger than many had predicted. As the technical team disconnected the video feeds, Robert approached with a tablet displaying early market reactions. Stocks up 8% already. The analysts are using phrases like refreshingly direct and strategically coherent. Even Baldwin's initial commentary is more measured than expected. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.